When you think of Rick and Morty, who exactly do you think of? I'm gonna assume Rick and Morty. I mean, the show was literally named after them. And if your name is good enough to be a part of the title, then clearly you're an important part of the show. Let's take SpongeBob for example. He's the main character, and the show's title is his full legal name. When you think of the show, you think of him, just like how you think of Rick and Morty when you think of their show. Not only because of the name, but also they're the most familiar faces at a glance. While SpongeBob is the most important person in his show, that's not exactly the case for Rick and Morty. Rick has always been the overarching main character of the show, and Morty has almost always been an accessory to both Rick and the plot of the show. Now clearly Morty isn't just some side character. He definitely is and always will be the second face of the show, but clearly his existence is really not that important. Morty relies on Rick, and vice versa, but if you take Morty out of the show, you still have a plot, and you still have a fundamentally sound show. Rick can always have his own episodes because he brings so much to the table. With his large intelligence and access to so many sci-fi tools, there's limitless possibilities for him and where his character can go. However, if you take Rick and only keep Morty, that's when things get a bit weird. Morty is interesting and all, but without Rick, things don't work so smoothly. Teenage boy characters have been overused so much that there's practically nothing that hasn't been done already. That's why the only episode without Rick is the lowest rated episode by a landslide. So sliding in Rick is a necessity, because while Morty makes the show interesting and unique, Rick isn't really dependent on Morty at all, like Morty is on him. Since season 1, the show itself even hinted and tried to say how it is not really about Morty at all, and almost entirely just about Rick.
See, when a Rick is with a Morty, the genius waves get canceled out by the, Morty waves.
Morty is told to his face by Rick how inferior he is, and how he's just a tool. Now that's very harsh, but it's honestly pretty true. Yeah, Morty has a lot going on in the first season, but who time and time again introduces the plot, or even more frequently comes in to save the day? Rick. He's the main plot of most episodes, and he's the reason so many episodes start the way they do. The family annoys him, so he gives them a magical box to solve all their problems, and Morty comes to him distraught, so he takes out his enemy. Rick really just escalates problems, only to be the main one de-escalating his and other people's problems. Is Rick destructive? In some sense, yes, but everything he does is inevitable. Because if he isn't touching some random alien egg, someone else in the family is going to be right behind him, doing just that. Rick is a problem solver, just as much as he is a destructive narcissistic drunk. But if Rick is so important at all times, then what does that make Morty? Honestly, useless. After season 1, it seems like Morty slots in as merely a sidekick than his own central character. So many instances have Morty just accompanying Rick, instead of having his own adventures or even calling his own shots during Rick's adventures. What's even worse for him is he starts to become not even a secondary character, but more of a background character. For someone who the show is literally named after, Morty is constantly being grouped with other characters to achieve the same purpose. Instead of Rick just bringing Morty on adventures, if he takes Summer, he's able to still act as the primary character when Morty is being pushed back to the same, smaller role as his sister, and thus minimizing his value. Rick brings along and trusts Summer more than Morty on multiple occasions. Back when he had a huge obsession with Gotron ferrets, Summer was the one to enable his addiction and be his #1 partner. With Rick spending so much time with Summer, Morty was left alone, and he took the complete opposite path of his sister and defied Rick. Rick always gives Summer lots of responsibilities he couldn't give to Morty because he sees him as a liability, and anything Rick makes, the two of them always fight over. Summer gets her way a lot of the time because she knows how little Morty means to Rick, and even though she is a smaller part of his life, he is able to value her higher. It's not just his sister taking away Rick's attention, but also his mom, and even sometimes his dad. Since the beginning of the show, Beth has always relied on Rick more than anyone else, and he's always been there for her. Rick can manipulate and control Beth because he knows that she needs him more than he needs her. Even if Morty's not the one taking the seat, he always needs one of his family members with him for a bait or extra hands. And Rick showed that he has control and dominance by breaking up Beth and Jerry when Jerry got in his way. Rick is able to choose his sidekick at will. That's why there will always be a rotating door of people to fill that role. Rick's needs directly correlate with the importance of other characters, and that's why in some cases, Jerry's lack of awareness and utterly low intelligence make even him a suitable candidate to replace Morty. The problem with Morty is him and Rick are so dysfunctional together. In seasons 1, 3, and 7, Rick bonds more with Morty's family than he's ever been able to bond with Morty himself. So if he can do that, then why should Rick even want to surround himself with Morty when he has other people he can manipulate? Quickly, before we continue, if you enjoyed the video so far, please consider subscribing to the channel or liking the video. It really helps, and we're starting to close in on 500 subscribers. Morty has some other problems besides his family trying to take his spot. The writers might be trying to even signal that they're getting rid of Morty. He changed a lot since the first season, where he was just an awkward kid and nothing better to do than be a yes man for Rick. But now, he's become more independent and willing to stand up for himself. One very impactful episode from season 7 really shines this idea. One of my favorites, episode 10, Fear No More, was a cinematic masterpiece because it took a complex look at what Rick means to Morty and how he's growing into a different person who doesn't need Rick. The episode focused on Morty coming to terms with his over-reliance on Rick and a constant need for his approval. At the end of it all, Morty is left emotionally and psychologically in shambles. I think that this episode really broke Morty, but because we no longer fully see the inner thoughts of Morty after he escaped from the hole, it's uncertain of how he feels at this point. All we know is that Morty intentionally faced his demons, and some sort of change, good or bad, came from it. Just a little side note, but it's never actually been confirmed whether we are watching from the inside of the fear hole still or not. I doubt it because an entire season has gone by, but it wouldn't surprise me, and that would also have huge implications if Morty still hasn't faced his fears. Aside from that, Morty has been actually distancing himself for years, and most people never notice. Sometimes he kills Rick, and other times he's actively trying to avoid Rick in any way he can. But overall, in recent years, Morty has been growing away from Rick naturally. A lot of times, Morty finds himself in horrible situations where Rick completely abandons him and leaves Morty to fend for himself. Knowing that he relies on Rick, but also the fact that he can't trust Rick, has really developed his character into a stronger, standalone being. At points when Morty is fully aware of this, he tries to escape the grasp of Rick and be a normal kid, but Rick is too smart, and Morty, although he does gain confidence to a certain degree, he is never strong enough to fully leave Rick behind. It's something he actively wants, but can't ever do, and that just makes his subconscious even worse. Morty is more so held emotionally hostage by Rick because he doesn't have the strength to leave and couldn't handle the trauma of being fully let go of. Morty still obeys and follows Rick, but the dynamic is different. Morty has a sense of his own value so that Rick can't boss him around anymore like he used to. But the more that Morty continues to grow and develop an ego, the less he fits in with the original show. Huge callback to when this was first mentioned back in season 1. Rick says it best.
A cocky Morty can lead to some big problems. Can be a real bad thing for everybody.
Oh yeah? How's that?
I'll explain when you're older.
While this didn't really apply much in season 1, it's starting to become a real thing. Judging off Rick's comments, it's clear this type of Morty is exactly what Rick fears, and something he does not see viable for his sidekick. Rick has explored fully, not just in theory, but in full swing, that Morty is replaceable. Morty isn't the asset he once was, but other people are, and he proved it, making Crows, Jerry, Summer, and Beth all equally valuable. Morty has had so many replacements, it's funny. A huge focus has always been the multiverse in the show, and other than Rick, Morty is the most prevalent person across the multiverse. Ricks have a long history of taking advantage of their Mortys for specific and selfish needs, and there's one major Morty who could even fully replace all of our Morty's utilization. When tracking down Rick Prime, Rick was accompanied and assisted by evil Morty, far more than his own Morty. He is someone at Rick's level who acts like a secondary, equally powerful mind, something Morty C-137 is not. Morty's other replacements have also had high upsides over him. With Rick's connections and access to new sidekicks growing, Morty has started to seem not only replaceable, but completely upgradable. He seems like a step down from someone like Summer or Evil Morty, One other huge and important thing is Morty has seen firsthand when things go bad for Rick, he replaces everyone. Twice now, Morty's had to bury his own body and watch Rick replace everyone around him. He's seen the multiverse, he knows he's one of billions of Mortys, and he deep down knows his replacement is always ready. That brings this conflict from a what if to something that genuinely could happen any day now. Rick knows it, and especially Morty knows it. And if a character starts becoming too replaceable, that doesn't just affect the main characters, it also affects the entire direction that the writers take the show. Lately, it hasn't just been Rick replacing Morty, but the show itself has been too. Episode plots are starting to evolve, and focus is going to Rick more than ever. The writers have been trying new things out, and by doing so, they're evolving characters other than Morty. Jerry, for crying out loud, is more important to Season 8 than everyone but Rick, and especially Morty. If you were completely new to the show and just started watching in Season 8, you could genuinely think that the show was called Rick and Jerry. Out of 10 episodes, Jerry's a main character of 4, and he's even gotten an entire 2 episodes almost entirely about him. Morty is the star of 6, but none of them are about him. The writers tried a completely different approach to this season. Morty's family aren't just his replacements for story, but in a higher sense, they are taking both his screen time and his importance. Morty's becoming a sidelined character. He's present, but he's not central anymore. In the beginning, he was essential to story flow, but now, Rick is so developed on his own, he can drive the plot by himself. Rick's role has increased so much more because the writers made it that way. With the current trajectory, Morty isn't being removed. Instead, he's slowly being moved out. The writers aren't done with him, they're bored with him. After 13 years of the same iconic character, Morty has become what many viewers thought he couldn't. He's grown into his own identity, someone who has room to breathe outside of the grip of others. This was always going to be inevitable because what he once was is so easy to do, and he is and always will be replaceable. The difference now is Morty doesn't care. He's fine taking a lesser role in Rick's life, and because of that, he's grown out of the writer's top priority list. Most fans hate to see it this way, but the show has outgrown the need for a character like Morty. But in the most poetic way possible, they're giving him the ending he deserves. He doesn't just get fired from Rick, or have a replacement show up at his door. Things around him slowly change, and he becomes replaced by everything. Not just one person. Change is something that will always happen. It happened to Rick and other characters, but their endings were completely different. So what happens next for Morty? Well, he's becoming, for story's sake, irrelevant. Him and Rick are voiced by different people now, so it's easier than ever to split this duo up. We're watching from the sidelines as Rick and Morty evolves past Morty, and that's a good thing.